Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. Are you doing the best for your client to help them create their legacy? Are you creating a plan that goes far beyond finances to help people ensure that it becomes the driving force behind all decisions? On this podcast, hosts Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller will help you with growing your practice and your clients' peace of mind. Together, they bring the best and brightest minds to share with you how to help your clients develop their best legacy. And now, here are your hosts, Katie Beth and Stan.
Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with your hosts, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. Our guests today are John Scott and Kip Bilderback. John, Kip, welcome to the show. We are so excited to have you guys.
Well, thank you.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So before we dive right in with all of our questions, I was hoping you guys could take turns and tell us a little bit about each of your backgrounds and how you got into the industry that you're in. So Kip, we'll start with you, and then John, I want you to answer the same question.
Sounds good. Thank you, Katie. Well, again, my name is Kip Bilderback. My company is Bilderback Business Advisors. We offer consulting services to smaller businesses with kind of a lean into attorneys and other professionals. How I got here is I was a practicing attorney. I started my law career in the early 90s, had a great firm that I was able to grow with from a few lawyers to over 122 lawyers at our peak. Over the course of time, I understood that the practice of law is a craft and that the business of law is a business, and that you have to understand and undertake an interest in those facets in order to pay yourself for what you do well. After I sold my interest in the law firm, I decided to spend my time sharing my skill set with other companies. So I advise business leaders on process, operations, and those types of things to help them be more efficient and more profitable.
Fantastic. Great. Go ahead, John.
So my name is John Scott, and I am a CPA partner at Anders in St. Louis. And part of what we do with our 400 people that are in 25 states throughout the country is we provide virtual CFO services for small and mid-sized businesses. My group that I head up focuses on law firms. And my origin story is growing up in a middle market CPA firm, not one of the big ones, not one of the small ones. We tended to get all of our work from attorneys. And those referrals were great because they generally had fees that were higher than ours. And so they would be good referrals. And early on, I met a very entrepreneurial attorney who decided that he perfected his craft in his niche of law. And he decided he wanted to expand. And he expanded to 44 cities and the United Kingdom. And I watched him grow this business. He made some poor decisions, but because he paid attention to the data, he was able to course correct quickly. And so really over my 17-year career working with this entrepreneur, I learned what really worked for law firms to grow and scale and what didn't. And so that's what brought me to the point of being an advisor to law firms.
Gotcha. And then tell us a little bit about how you two kind of got to know each other and how the work that you do is complementary.
Well, the commonality between the two of us is his lovely wife, Kathleen, who I've known for years because she's an estate planner and we did a lot of estate planning with our wealthy clients. And then I met Kip, being a lawyer. I was very interested in what he did. We do things socially. I've been clients of his wife. He's been clients of our firm for a long time. We just hit it off, and we seem to have the same approach when it comes to helping law firms, in that he can help on the process side, I can help on the finance side, and it just works really well together.
Very cool. All right, Stan, I can see you brimming with questions. What questions do you have?
I have a lot of questions because, as you know, I have a law firm. I'm in this space, and you guys are talking about systems and process efficiency, improving profitability. All of those things resonate a lot with me. And so I'm really curious, when you guys undertake a new relationship, when you have a new engagement, a new client, what are some of the common themes that you notice that you're able to fix? There must be common themes when you find a new client. There must be things that you see recurring that you can step in and say, wow, we can work some magic here pretty quickly? What are some of those things?
Well, I'll start. A client typically comes to me looking at what I've done in the past and says, "Hey, Kip, I want to scale my law practice." And the first thing I have to ask is, what does scale mean to you? Does scale mean you want to have a bigger geographic footprint? Do you want to have a higher profitability? Do you want to have a higher gross revenue? Or do you want to make sure you're providing a type of service that no one else can in a way that no one else can? And so that's the first piece we go through to identify that. And a commonality is most attorneys haven't thought about that. They really haven't given a lot of thought about what it means. They just see it as kind of the shiny thing out there and want to approach it. So when I get in, some of the basic things I find operationally that take away from the ability to work in that control tower position to figure out and to achieve what you want are basic repeatability issues. A lot of attorneys, when we go to law school, are trained to craft a brief, draft an estate plan, take a position and argue it. But what they don't tell you is how to manage that craft to create, let's say, a process for it. What is common to effectively bill it? That's where John comes in, to effectively manage the finances around it, to make sure that you are able to capture revenue. So just by example, you have a law firm that, say, does estate planning. You have 2 or 3 estate planning attorneys, all of whom come from a different perspective. Do they use a base form for that? Is there a timeline, a base process that that from the time you get a client to the engagement letter, to the meetings, to the documents, to execution, what's involved, how much time it should take, how you track that time, how you track those inputs in order to have data so that you can make better decisions to achieve your goal, whether that is higher profitability, giving yourself more time to really deeply understand your clients, to be able to replicate that, let's say, in a different state from where you are. You are in Little Rock, Arkansas. Well, do you want to do it in Texas as well? And how does that look? How do you have that data to translate that into a better operation for you and to meet your goals? Financially, this is where the overlap comes in with John, because that's what he knows. And I'll pass it over to him to discuss his end a little bit.
Yeah, we want to look at those goals that you have, but from a slightly different lens. And we focus on the financial piece. So we focus on your cash position, not only what is your cash, but what should your cash be to help you achieve your goals, but then your financials to make sure those are clean so we can help you make good decisions and let you focus on practicing law, but give you the relevant data to make those decisions. Then we turn our attention to production. How much are you doing versus what's your capacity? How do we get that new work? And then that leads into the pipeline. Where does our work come from? How do we attract new leads? How do we close those leads? And it all builds into what we call profit-focused accounting. We want to do and help you do that part so that you can do what your highest and best use is: meet client needs, do client service, and then make decisions based on good data.
Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. And I heard a marketing component of that too, at least a, a data analytics aspect of marketing, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and fundamentally, even if you don't look at marketing, so many professionals don't necessarily know what their best referral sources are, whether it's a billboard or another attorney or an estate plan, a financial person in town. And even if you just sat down and said, okay, where's our work coming from? Where are our best clients coming from? And we're going to ignore the bottom third of these referral sources and focus our efforts on the top third. And you're going to get more better clients that way than spreading out your efforts over the entirety.
So one of the things that really attracts me in just having a conversation with you guys is that I know that from working with a lot of different law firms, you get to see the inside of what's happening there, and you get the perspective of all these different law firm experiences, and you're able to bring that to a conversation with, let's say, a guy like me. I have cocktail party conversations. I know what guys tell me, over drinks or over dinner, but you guys are inside, you see the books, you know what's really working, what's not working. And sometimes I think I don't always get the whole story because people tend to want to tell you the good stuff and ignore the bad stuff. And so I really like that you guys are getting the whole story. And I'm curious to know, like, what are some of the, like initially when you engage a client, what are some of the initial action steps you take that if I do this, this will begin to move the needle? What are some of the common solutions you bring to a relationship?
In an hourly billing firm, it focuses on charge hour expectations and is our staff, including the partners, are they meeting those expectations? I mean, Kip and I both know of a firm that cash was really tight. The partners were trying to figure out what was going on. And so they weren't necessarily serving clients because they were pulling their hair out trying to put out fires. And when in reality, the staff and the partners were not serving clients and sending out bills. So once we identified that, fixed that situation, it took a couple of months, but it turned the cash position around. And really, if you come down and you set expectations and then you make sure that, and you monitor those and let people know that, hey, we do expect this and you're going to be judged on this, then good things will happen as long as you adhere to the policies. And it comes back to billing hygiene. If your partners are responsible for sending out bills and they don't adhere to the policies that have been set, it's not fair to the rest of the partner group. I mean, even if you're in a small firm, if you don't send out bills, clients aren't going to pay.
So, I have a lot of discussions with my colleagues about hourly billing versus fixed fee billing. What are your thoughts about that? You see a lot, you're inside a lot of law firms. What's your take on which works better?
I think fixed fee can work really well. In fact, I think clients like fixed fee. And if you set your fee correctly, which means, and this is all the attorneys here are going to say no, you have to track time. Okay, that's the only way to job cost to see if you're charging the right amount. Clients love knowing that they're going to pay X for a project. But if you're not tracking your time, and I'll call it an argument. I have this discussion with subscription-based and fixed fee attorneys all the time. No, that's the reason we're doing it this way. I don't want to track time. I get it. You don't want to track time. It's not that the client's going to see rate times hour. You're just going to track hours to determine your efficiency or your profitability on the jobs, and you're going to adjust the price accordingly going forward.
That makes sense.
I'm sorry, Katie.
No, you're fine. It makes so much sense. I love that what you guys do is it feels like you really come in and get a lot of data, and that's where the process starts. So I love that. Go ahead, Kip. What were you going to say?
Well, and I think you brought up the point. It's all about data. If you're tracking hours and you know your hours, you're able to adequately do a fixed fee or a flat rate for projects. But then even stepping back from putting hours in, it's how are you managing what you are getting? How are you tracking this time? How are you tracking the components of that, whether it be the documents, the research, the interview time, the client time. And if you go into a flat fee setting, not only by capturing the hours do you get to feel if it works, you can also start to achieve efficiencies if you're not duplicating work on matters. If everyone is kind of pulling in the same direction, you can achieve a higher level of profitability without having to increase your fees. I also find that the people I work with who do that also find that they get a higher client satisfaction ratio as well.
Talk to me about systems and process. Is that for us, in my own experience, I'll tell you that's one of the most difficult things to develop and install in an organization. How do you approach that?
Well, let me ask you a question. What's the best way to eat an elephant?
Okay, we know that, right? It's a bite at a time.
One bite at a time. That's exactly it. If I walk into your office and I look at it and I try to take you from where you are, whatever that may be, all the way over here, you're going to balk. You're going to look at the overall costs and say, this is sunk costs. You're going to look at the time. You're going to look at the resources and go, I can't do it. So what I ask my clients to do is to pick one thing and try it out. If you are completely manual, then just make a list of what you do manually. If you've got some kind of case management system, take a little time and see what you're tracking. Write it down on a piece of yellow paper for one aspect, maybe a basic estate plan, maybe your engagement letter. And then once you have that down, save it. Look at the next thing. Then start visiting how you can effectuate change. You don't have to go from paper files on 500 people's desks with no understanding to the most whiz-bangy system going. You just have to make incremental change. The nice thing is I think that dovetails in with what John talks about, and that helps you then manage your expenses because you're not trying to swallow several $100,000 of consultancy fees, infrastructure fees, et cetera. You can start and probably fuel a lot of that with some time and out of your existing cash flow.
Interesting. Let me pivot a bit. I want to share with you, I was recently at a legal tech conference over in Miami, and I was surrounded by like a room full of like 800 to 1,000 guys, and almost all of them had a startup business that provided some kind of a technology solution, mostly AI driven, that would make law firms more efficient. I'm curious to hear your take on the changes you see coming that are brought about by the advances in technology and specifically the advances that artificial intelligence bring into the space.
All right, I'll go first.
I knew if I kept quiet long enough, you'd go there.
I am a huge proponent of AI, not necessarily the hundreds of startup businesses that were there, but I think that firms, small, medium, and large, that don't embrace AI will be left behind. And the example I give is when I got into accounting back in the Stone Age, if the hunting was good, the Indians would bring by a deer. That's how long ago it was that I got into accounting. But we did not have big spreadsheet capabilities. We didn't have Excel. We had VisiCalc and Lotus, but we were doing amortization schedules by hand, depreciation schedules by hand. And then lo and behold, comes along the PC with the big floppy disk, and we could do those things quicker. And now the stuff that you can do with Excel is just, it's the reason we could raise rates. AI is going to be that same revolution as long as we treat it with respect and use it in the best possible way. So when it comes to repeatable processes, demand letters, my daughter is an attorney. She works for kind of a public law place in Illinois, and she works with people who are getting thrown out of Section 8 housing. Well, she has to close cases, otherwise they don't come off her system. And she had 19 cases that she had to go through all the notes and kind of write a summary. And I said, there's got to be a solution out there. Reach out to your IT department, capture all those notes that are already in your system, get a summary. I'm not saying take the summary that comes out of AI and say, okay, this is closed. You have to review it, but let that do the heavy lifting. And if you think of med mal cases where they hire nurses to review medical records, it would be much more efficient to use one of those startups, and I've seen 10 of these groups, that will take all those med mal records and synthesize it into something then a nurse can take a look at, and it minimizes the time of going through all these 10,000 pages of records to get to the really important stuff. You still need the human element, but it can make that case more efficient. Now, one other comment on AI, in that your engagement letter says flat fee or time and expense. If it's a time and expense and you create an efficiency, that goes to the client, right? Because you're charging them time and expense. If you modify your engagement letter to say, I'm going to value bill it or fixed fee it, and you're more efficient, then you get to keep those efficiencies.
So
you'd have to do that, right? Or you're actually working against yourself in that process, right?
Right.
Are there any technologies that you can just call by name and say, we've looked at these and we think these may be the leaders in changing the game for law firms? Any that you particularly like?
I will tell you, I've had a long experience. When we started, we had WordPerfect 4.0 on a DOS machine. We had no databases. We were using thermal faxes. So I've experienced the growth throughout. I do not believe there is a single silver bullet for all law firms. That being said, I believe there are many robust solutions out on the marketplace that have some age on them, some experience that I feel you can start with. My opinion is I stay away generally as an attorney from startups, because if they go away, you could be stuck with data in a storage manner or in somewhere that you can't get at it. And I've seen this when we started, there was a program called Time Slips, neat little program to do your time slips every day and get them out. Time Slips was supported by two brothers. And eventually, I think one of them got out of the business for whatever reason, and it didn't exist or it was bought out. And you got stuck. And I saw many of my friends do the same thing. So from our perspective, when I was working with my firm, we developed everything in-house. I don't recommend that 100% because the costs are high, but you should really look towards existing systems from reputable manufacturers. The key with out-of-the-box solutions are they're not going to fit you out of the box. You need to understand that even if you buy the neatest, whiz-bangiest thing for case management, accounting, or anything else, you're going to have to spend the time and the investment to customize it to your needs to make sure it works for you. So don't think that you're going to walk in and the sales guys will say, hey, we can do all this stuff. Don't think you're going to walk in, install on your machine, and your practice will be revolutionized.
Yeah, okay. That sounds like good wisdom, good insight. I have another question I want to pursue with you guys in the time we have remaining here. And this is a pretty big question. And I'm really curious to get your take on this. For the last few hundred years, the rules in law practice were that you couldn't sell it to anybody who was not a lawyer. As you know, the District of Columbia Bar has changed the rules on that, and the Arizona Bar has changed the rules on that. And there's conversation going on now in some other states where they're contemplating that. I'm really curious just to get your take on what you see as the trajectory and whether or not you think that's an opportunity for us or maybe not such a good idea.
I am talking with a firm right now in the Northeast that he's an entrepreneur. He's got a small firm, makes a fine living, but he is trying to buy a firm right now of about $5 million. And his idea is over the next 4 or 5 years to get 4 or 5 of those firms, get it to 30 or 40 million, and then have private equity. He is assuming that all those rules will change, and then private equity will buy the entity out. Now, having said that, as an accounting firm, we don't have those encumbrances. So PE is buying all kinds of accounting firms. And while it would be great for me, I'm in the fall of my life, it is unfair to my younger partners and the partners that will come behind me, because what does private equity want? A return. And so I'm sure you've had doctor groups and other things that have rolled up into private equity. I had an oral malfaxil group that they were making $1.5 million to $2 million a year. They got a big payday. They rolled over equity in the private equity group, and they'll get a second bite of the apple. It'll be even bigger than the first bite. But they went from making $1.5 million to $2 million down to 500,000. And all the new docs that are coming up afterwards will have this compressed salary. So while it's great for the older owners, it's not necessarily great for the younger owners and the owners to be. And I think it's a mistake ultimately, I don't agree that it's the way to sell your business. But there are firms that don't have a succession plan, and that's a good exit for them.
Yeah. So if you're a solo practitioner, it's a pretty sad day to reach that point in your life when you realize I want to retire now, or perhaps if I fall over, that my entire life's work has almost no value. Maybe it's worth the value of the used computers and the furniture, but beyond that, it's not much. And that's a pretty sad story when, we've all had clients, guys that built businesses, owned McDonald's franchises, sold them, and had a really nice exit. And they have a real nest egg they can retire on, whereas the lawyers never get that. So it's an interesting shift. I don't see I know I'm old enough to remember when lawyers couldn't advertise. And I
Yeah.
remember all of that changed in one day, right? Because the US Supreme Court in that Bates and Osteen case said that it's a violation of the First Amendment to prohibit lawyers from advertising. And then it went from no advertising to billboards everywhere within like almost a matter of hours, and newspaper ads and everything, TV ads and all those things. I'm not sure what the pathway is to get the rules changed to allow this. I'm not sure that there's a legal argument that would result in a Supreme Court decision that could bring about this change all at once. So it's going to be, my sense is it's going to be an evolution done on a state basis. But it does seem to me that it does open the door to provide a meaningful exit at the end of a career so that you actually have something to show for it. And that seems to me to be a pretty attractive, compelling carrot for younger lawyers. And yes, it may be that they don't make as much money in the early days, but there is real value there. And so, it's interesting to see. I think we're in the very early stages of thinking about this. And I'll stop talking because I'm actually curious to hear what Kip has to say about this.
It's interesting because of these restrictions. About 10 or 15 years ago, we saw a lot of firms in our space start to sell off back office. So they would gather up their operational work and whatnot and provide that to law firms. So you could get a piece of the back office business, contract with them and whatnot. That kind of fell apart over time, I think because they were paying too high of a multiple for their acquisitions. But I think it leads to some interesting thought. Part of what I deal with on a regular basis is the fact that attorneys typically are not dialed in to the operational issues of running a business. Also, if you're a solo practitioner or a small practitioner, you don't necessarily achieve the economies of scale. So in many respects, I think it could be attractive from a business standpoint. I think it can be attractive to someone who's later in the practice, who has an established book of business, a good reputation, so that they could sell and realize their goodwill. I also think there's some level of attractiveness to a young lawyer who doesn't want to have to become a business owner, business manager, who says, hey, I want to practice law and let someone else take care of that. They can look at these firms that have been combined in with venture capital and maybe walk in there and have a decent salary. My main concern as an attorney, and I've not really looked on how they've resolved this in the medical profession, but as an attorney, I think there is so much ethical responsibility, so much judgment that goes into what we do in the craft of law, that I think as it goes forward, those are the issues that are going to have to be answered. How do we preserve the ethical nature of the profession when people who do not have law licenses that could be subject to being taken away are the ones making the decisions? And that can come up in, how do we use AI? Are we supervising our people properly? Are we protecting client information properly? And if you're not an attorney without that threat, you may be threatened to lose your business, but are you going to make those same decisions? I don't know. I'll be curious to see how it plays out, and I imagine it will play out within years and not decades.
Well, that was certainly the sense I got from the lawyers at this legal tech conference. It was almost an assumed conclusion that 10 years from now, all of those prohibitions had completely disappeared, and we'd be dealing in a world where law firms could be bought and sold by anybody. I don't know if 10 years is a reasonable time horizon for that, but that was certainly let's say, the embedded assumption in most of the conversations I had with those guys. That you're saying not, years, not decades.
Yeah, I think so. I think 10 plus years would be max. It's just the way business is going. Venture capital is looking for investments. There are so many ways to maximize the profitability of a law firm because we just lag behind as a profession in technology and approach. I mean, a lot of the things that I'm talking to with my clients are what venture capitalists will impose in their operations and have expertise. So yeah, I do think it's going to happen sooner rather than later, as long as the ethical implications are properly addressed. And that could be the hangup.
Yeah. Well,
There's
that's why
really
the rule exists anyway, right? Yeah.
But there's really two pieces to value here, right? One is the prohibition against non-attorney ownership, and the other is the lack of a non-compete. I mean, if you look at an accounting firm or an engineering firm versus a law firm doing the same revenue and same profitability, those other two firms are more valuable than the law firm, because I could buy the law firm if I was an attorney, but all the attorneys can walk out the door the next day and the clients would select where they stay. So there's no goodwill there. There is value to a law firm, but it's not as great as it is in another profession, because at Anders, the clients are the firm's clients. They're not my clients. Could the clients come with me? Yeah, they could, but I have to buy them.
Yeah.
Great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you guys would like our listeners to know before we run out of time?
Ooh, I have something.
Okay.
I'd like to point out that my good friend John Scott has recently published a book, and I would like him to tell us about it so he can make sure that your listeners pick it up and read it, because it's fantastic reading.
Well, there you go. We got to hear about that.
We got to hear about it. Go ahead, John.
The book is Judicial Dollars and Cents, and I will make sure that you all have that information for the show notes, and I'll send you guys a copy as well. And it just goes through the profit-focused accounting that I talked about earlier, and what we try and do to help lawyers pull different levers to increase their cash flow and profit.
That's fantastic. Very, very timely, and goes great with everything we've talked about on the show today. So, Kip, thank you for bringing that up, because John was too modest to. And thank you for all of our listeners. Thanks for joining us. This has been the Legacy Leaders podcast with your hosts, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. And our guests today were John Scott and Kip Bilderback. So to get connected with John, you can visit anderscpa.com. And to get connected with Kip, you can visit bilderbackadvisors.com. You can also find John and Kip both on LinkedIn. And be sure to pick up your copy of Judicial Dollars and Cents. We will link all of those things for you in the show notes. And John and Kip, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller. For more information on them and the show, please visit pinnaclelegacylaw.com. If you like what you've learned today, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.